Welcome to the Gen AI podcast, where the future meets fun and tech talk trends. Get ready to dive into the world of artificial intelligence like never before. Your hosts, Dale, Alan, Greg, and Val, are about to take you on a wild ride through the AI universe. So, buckle up, tune in, and let the AI adventure begin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 26 of the Gen AI podcast. We keep going. We had a little break since the last episode 25, but I'm very pleased to see my good friend Greg Lawton. Greg, you've been absent for a couple of these because you've been all over the world. Some big news on the Nodes and Links side, so well done on that. We don't have to cover it on this one, but folks, go check out Greg's LinkedIn profile. You'll hear all about it. So they're making some big waves there. But what's been happening in your world since we've last spoken?
I've been cutting years off my life with the amount of jet lag and lack of sleep that I've faced. No, that's basically what you know exactly what's been happening. I've gone across the US twice, across Europe a couple of times, and it's to be honest, it's the success of my team, not really the success of me. I'm kind of going in, smiling, shaking hands, and having some ideas about how things work, but it seems that the industry is really ready for understanding what automation, AI can bring to construction project management.
Yeah, I think the tide is changing or rising, whichever way you want to look at it as well, for the topic of AI as we sort of get a better understanding broadly, I guess across the world really. And it's an interesting one, and apologies for those of you watching this as well. It looks like I'm in a very dark place, but I've just got maybe I am in a dark place. I've got a very bright background behind me, so I might look just like a silhouette. But no, it's an interesting space. Before we move on, a shout out to Al as well. Al's on the other side of the world. And as always, a shout out to Val, who's never appeared on the Gen AI podcast, but we will endeavor to get him on too. But I think...
No, we won't. This is just going to be the longest running joke.
Yes, indeed. So let's start with sort of the global view on things, because the big news is around tariffs, and whilst there may not be a direct link on the face of it, I think there is an impact, I guess, on AI and how it progresses, but more specifically around projects as well. You mentioned there you seeing a sort of a lowering of the barrier to adopting technology at large, which is great. And we know in terms of technology, the main focus is AI at the moment. And I know we've been over this before, but I think people are getting to understand a bit more about what is generative AI that hallucinates and is just a general thing that you can use like a ChatGPT versus something that's quite specific, that becomes a bit more predictive and has the context of what you're trying to do. The types of AI that yourself and Al are looking at doing and provide to the industry. So that is great because that moves projects forward and allows us to deliver better as well. But in terms of that general adoption, I think there's still some work to do, but I think curiosity is increasing. If we look, taking your global view, do you see any differences between the various sort of countries, continents that you've been to in terms of adoption of AI, increasing or not?
So I can talk about my personal perceptions, then we can talk about the data that's being recorded. Different countries are at different stages, on average, of the adoption journey, but generally, almost all countries are moving in the right direction in terms of going from like early innovators to early adopters and early majority and those kinds of things. What I find is very interesting that's coming in is there's a lot of countries and almost taking a nationalist approach to development of AI, very similarly to how they look at things like bullets, guns, data centers, hospitals, and other critical national infrastructure. So, for example, America is restricting the export of AI chips. The UK is luckily not included in the restrictions, but quite a few allied countries are. Um, China and obviously the US are having a bit of a back and forth there. And the US is adopting a very much a nationalist strategy of chip manufacture. So all of the chip manufacture needs to move from Taiwan to the US because of this kind of thing. And to be honest, like I can kind of there are ways that I can look at the world where that makes sense. Because if a huge part of the workforce of the future is going to be AI, and AI is fundamentally living in a data center on a chip, whoever designs the chip and wherever the chip resides in the data center fundamentally controls the workforce. So, I can imagine a future where half of the workforce of France is actually American, and America's controlling that workforce, and then, you can see why this gets very nationalist very quickly in countries' minds. So what I'm seeing is like the kind of the adoption is growing across almost all countries, kind of as expected. But now we're seeing the growing of nationalist protective policies around the development and housing of the infrastructure to deliver AI in those countries too.
So it's interesting you bring that up because Al and I think it was in the last episode, we spoke about this national identity of AI, right? And we're like, if you actually think about it, to your point, the US might be claiming OpenAI, right? ChatGPT, but those developers are from all over the world, right? They could be Chinese, they could be anyone, right? And so it's quite an interesting thing. And at the heart of it, if you think about it, like who cares, right? But there is this play which is quite interesting to see how it plays out. So
Yeah, we could go down the route of a little bit of conspiracy theory, but there's what I'd say is there's practicalities to defense and national infrastructure.
Yeah.
So, just forget that it's AI. Think about it as a dam. Could an engineer have come from a different country who designed the dam? Yeah. Could they have, snuck a secret weakness like, I don't know, a 2-meter hole on the Death Star in there? Yeah, theoretically. But if you've got the right checks and balances, it should have been found out and understood.
Yep.
Does it still require someone to fly into the country and to stick a bomb through the dam? Probably.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, well, and then is it the only asset in the country versus having 200 dams across the country? And, it gets pretty complicated pretty fast, I'd say.
Yes.
What I'd say is, if I'm sitting in an office where the local government can walk in and arrest people, there's probably an element of control that government can put on that office.
Yes, absolutely. So, and there's different lenses, as you say, we can go down different rabbit holes in terms of whether it's defense, security, or just general AI, to improve everyday lives. But one rabbit hole that I do want to potentially go down, because I don't think we've gone down deep enough in the past few episodes, is what are we seeing right now that people might not be aware of that are delivering projects that can be applied right now to improve how they're delivering project, whether that be by productivity, decision making, whatever the case might be. Because you often criticize me, rightly so, and challenge me back on when I ask a broad question, and we can go anywhere. But now I'm being very, very specific on projects, what can be implemented right now that people aren't taking advantage of, that they can use now, not futurescaping, but you can do this right now to deliver your project better.
There's a lot of them. Now, my expertise kind of lies in the project controls area. So, you know that we do a large amount of project scheduling and project controls, analytics, management, and reporting. So you can use large language models and generative AI models to automate all of the report generation and writing that you need to do, both formal and informal, so chatbots for more informal. You could also use it to structure data automatically. And what we're generally seeing is a lot of non-siloed users. So, for example, a scheduler is a siloed user of a schedule, but lots of people need to understand and see schedule data. So it's actually the spreading and proliferation of information. So that's what we're seeing a lot of. You've obviously got what Alan does around a lot of the benchmarking and machine learning. You've got quite a lot of companies who are doing tracking of progress. So I know that Build Dots are doing a bunch of data centers and chip fabs. You've got Doxel. You've got Sensat doing planning and infrastructure applications. There's quite a few of those. It's either vision, lidar, radar, pictures, site tracking, and essentially comparing it against BIM models and understanding progress. One that's actually been implemented for ages, which technically is AI, is things like invoice checking. So when you're receiving invoices and then correlating that against the payment systems, so understanding whether or not it's in budget, in scope, and being able to approve it, because a large project will get thousands and thousands of invoices a day to settle, and it's very easy to either not pay something that needs to be paid or to have people get successful at committing fraud as we're going through those. And then some of the other ones is around kind of design architecture change, where you can start understanding clash detection and running scenarios around those. That's just a high level overview of a bunch of stuff that ranges from things like computer vision to machine learning and large language models. But all of these are out and fully deployed now. OpenSpace, that's the one I was trying to remember about vision tracking. I think they just passed $1 billion valuation as well.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other one I'll throw in the hat there as well is Samterra. Samterra is used by a lot of big utilities companies as well, and it's a sort of the, line of sight from site to office, using imagery, as you say, video or picture, and then linking that to schedule, costs, scenarios, and all of that. And I think if I add to that from a Movar perspective, I think what we're finding is that clients are going, this is amazing, because we have access to all of these tools that can now all of a sudden collect data without having to be processed through big spreadsheets or, be go through storytelling from one person to the next, right? And if you can bring all of those information pieces, data sources together, using the nodes and links and the end plans of the world and some terrors of the world and the others and the A and others, then you can really harness, create almost that capability where you have what we're calling an integrated source of truth rather than single source. The reason I don't like the word single source is because there is no single source of truth on a project. You speak to 3 different people on a project, they give you 3 different answers. You look at 3 different tools and you'll get 3 different views of the project, right?
Yeah, I'm going to pick on that for a second. So, I've seen over the past 20, 30 years, the promise that was BIM. Now, what I'd say with that is, and BIM was I've got this, you and I have got this joke where it's like BIM 3D, 4D, 5D, 6D, all the way up to BIM 74D, everything. And it's like, okay, well, maybe the world isn't a pyramid with BIM at the center and everything surrounds BIM. Maybe the world is actually a lot of diverse perspectives looking at the same thing. And the thing is the project. And we know that that's actually what it is. Now, should things correlate and relate to each other? Absolutely. Is there a single source of truth? Well, no, because projects are social endeavors and contracts are promises between people. They're not physical properties of the universe. So there is no ground truth to social perspectives. That is just core 101 of day 1 of social sciences.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing. So I don't know if you saw it, you've been so busy. I did an interesting thing with Grok 3. And I asked it, why are you different to all of the other LLMs out there? And it said, well, I cut through all the BS basically. I said, okay, well, pick holes in the project controls profession. And it basically had a go at the profession, which was amazing. It's on my LinkedIn. And it's quite funny, but true in many instances, that in many instances, project controls and the things we do is we're not controlling anything really if you don't do it properly. You're just reporting the mess that everyone knows about. And so you're wasting time and money if that's what your project controls function is doing. If you have the right tools, people, and processes in place to actually give you meaningful outcomes that you can make decisions off of, then you have proper project controls. But if all your project controls function you're doing is reporting on stuff you already know, stop. Don't waste your time, right? Rather just get a
Yeah,
nose and links in there and report
I
on
would
it.
actually kind of a little bit agree with that. I'd actually split it up and say that, names are a little unfair because we oversimplify things. I say what you first have is project compliance, which is like one of the big reasons that modern projects are more work than historic projects, even if you're building the same thing, is there's more regulations today and there's more contractual requirements that you have to fulfill around paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
So one is it's project compliance. The second one is project measurement and project report writing. Now, arguably, you could go, well, the project managers do that. Yeah, but then you just have to have a project manager of project managers that pulls all of their reports into one report, and then different at different kind of levels. And then you can have project bettering. And the project bettering is kind of like the feedback loop back into um, the extremes of the professions. So, like, if you want to accelerate a project that has a complex schedule, you need a very, very senior scheduler to be working with the controls people on measuring and the project ground team and the engineers on people who are doing to be able to do the maths to figure out if it is actually accelerating stuff. So you could, project bettering is probably project bettering via coordination or something like that.
You've been spending too much time with the Yanks. We won't go down that rabbit hole. Yeah, I agree with you again, and I think that it's dynamic, right? And we've had this conversation before. Yes, whilst we have to apply systems thinking to projects, projects don't operate in a closed system. It's an open system, and there's so many variables, right? I mean, the human factors of people going off sick and having bad days and good days, right? Humans aren't machines. And so, how do you factor that into project controls? And so, you still need that level of experience coming in. But what I'd say to that is if it's just handle turning, get a nodes and links in and plug your schedules in and does all of those reports for you. If someone's doing that, don't waste your time. You get far better gains by actually redeploying that person's skills in doing meaningful work and analyzing what's coming out of it and going, okay, what decisions do we take here? And I think that helps everyone. So yeah, did you want to add to that before we jump onto?
No, I'm quite happy. The only thing I'd add to that now I'm thinking about it is for me the line keeps moving actually. So 5 years ago I was like, oh, there's only a small amount that AI is going to automate in project management, and today I'm like that amount's bigger, but there's and just by that trend, I'm like I actually don't know where the ceiling is anymore. I'm still of the view that it cannot fully automate everything in project management, just
No.
fundamentally. But, could I imagine a dystopian society where, let's say, a communist country basically says a bunch of people on the ground have to obey what the AI says and just do the project as they do it, and I'm not really interested in your opinions. And then an AI just coordinates the design and build of an entire highway. Maybe it's a Black Mirror episode, I don't know, but it's not a zero probability chance that will happen.
Yes. And the stage of where we're at with AI and technology at large, I think is all possibilities are still open, right?
Yeah.
Which we can state as a fact, I think. Where when we go down rabbit holes, these are our opinions and our views where we think it could go and potentially would go. We're never afraid to put our opinions forward, and I think that's what our listeners do appreciate about us, is that, you know, we're okay to be wrong. And if I sort of, knowing what I know over the past few weeks and months, if I look at that and go, how's that going to impact projects? I think, well, why do we need a Gantt chart? Why do we need a schedule, right? Any longer? Who's the schedule for, right? Really, who's it for? If it's just there so you can report on your key milestones and commercially, and, you know, those on site aren't actually even looking at it, then how much work do we actually need with it? And so do we actually need it to be this big thing? Or rather, could we have inputs from various areas, have someone that understands planning and scheduling to oversee it and make sure that it's good and right and robust and it's the right option to take? And then in terms of the actual day-to-day tasking or weekly tasking, you don't need to make that accessible to the entire organization, delivery organization. I don't know. That's where my mind is going with this, is like, why do you need a 40,000 line
Yeah,
Primavera P6
I
schedule?
think it comes down to segmentation of what you're trying to achieve. And I actually wrote in my book that, you know, every relationship in a schedule is a finished start. It's just that they're too aggregated if they're not. Because you can, every relate should be a finished start, but if you start like grouping activities, then you can have weird things like finish, finish, start, start, finish, starts, like middle finishes, like all of these kinds of things. It comes down to what is the operational task that you're trying to achieve. Like one could be, I'm trying to figure out how many people I need on site,
Mm,
or I'm trying to plan the work with the people I have. That needs detail. Another can be, I'm trying to commercially agree a contract, so I need a robust set of milestones or dates for milestones. That's not a schedule, that's just a list of dates. The challenge is robustness of those dates around probability. Another one could be around, if you're having an integrated master schedule, which is, I'm looking at the interface points and I'm trying to assess risk around interface points because of how commercial liability flows. That's a separate thing altogether. Another can be, I'm trying to um, get around some hard constraints to make sure that productivity can keep going. Like there's a very large number of reasons why people need certain information, and a lot of the time it's just assumed that this common thing called the schedule or the common thing called the cost plan or the common thing called the contract is the answer to every problem, and it's not the answer to every problem. And I think that this is where um, a lot of people in the industry struggle with their thinking about the future, because they assume that what they're doing today is the best way of achieving the task. But if you challenge them on the task, they actually can't quote you what the task is that they're trying to achieve. It's like that old experiment with I read about with the monkeys, where it's like they put like five monkeys in a pit,
mm,
and then had a ladder, and then whenever a monkey climbed the ladder, the other monkeys got electrocuted. And then, you know, over time, they kept doing this until it was a learnt behavior. And then they'd swap out the monkeys. And by the time they swapped out all five monkeys, they actually turned the electrocution off. But all five monkeys would beat up any monkey that tried to climb the ladder. It's kind of like this, where we're like, well, we must do this reporting and we must do this. But a lot of people aren't sitting there going, why are we actually doing
yeah.
this? Like, what's the task to do? Yeah, it's a very deep subject, this, but yeah, that's what I kind of see this as. And with the emergence of AI, which is fundamentally a work automation technology, it is forcing us to really ask those questions again. And a lot
Mm.
of the stuff is being found wanting.
100%. And again, I know listeners want us to debate this, Greg, but I think we need to double down on this point, is because it's costing projects money by not taking advantage of technology that's available today, right? Not just in the fees you pay, right, but the speed of decision making, right? And it's a no-brainer. And I'm getting passionate about this because I'm sick and tired of seeing, oh, it's too hard, it's too difficult, I don't trust it, it's not secure. Where that's fine, that's okay. But how do you test whether it works or not? Find something where you're comfortable, a sample, a work package, whatever it might be. Test it out. Work with the nodes and links and the end plans and the others out there to educate yourself on what it's doing, right? Because you're costing taxpayers money by not adopting technology.
Do you know what's actually the funny thing on what you just said? So at the start, we were talking about the adoption in the world. I've actually seen a very big change in the last year and a half in our company, in that at the start, 2 years ago, 18 months ago, we were having to, like, not convince, but put our vision of the future and the reasons why you'd want to engage this to people, and kind of almost engage in an evangelical, belief-driven conversation before we got the opportunity to prove. Now, there's so many projects and there's so many companies that are willing to do that. We actually don't even engage companies who are asking those questions anymore. It's just not worth our time. Like this 18 months ago, the demand was lower than the supply, so we were having to do convincing. Now the supply, I can't hire salespeople fast enough, and I can't hire subject matter experts fast enough. The supply is lower than the demand. So honestly, like, there's so much material out there. People will educate themselves eventually. And to be honest, entire companies are starting to have what is AI courses and all of this kind of stuff. Generally, one of the first questions we go in when we have a conversation with a project through a business is, like, what is your AI strategy around project controls and what are you trying to achieve? And if they go, we don't really have one, be like, cool, well, we're happy to have a conversation, but we won't be moving forward. Like, we don't need to work with organizations like that anymore.
So I've worked with organizations as well where I've asked the exact question, right? And because they didn't have one, I didn't ask permission. I wrote one for them. And I went, here it is for you. Let me know if you want something different or something changed. And most of the time they go, actually, that's spot on. That's great. And I said, then I go, okay, that's what we're working to. So, you almost, and the reason I think they don't have one is they don't know how.
Well, don't get me wrong. This is not, like, I don't blame anybody. It's and I'm like, what I just said is it's just economics. It's like, if you've got 100 people saying yes and one person saying no, you just ignore the no person, as opposed to if you have 100 people saying no and one person saying yes, you try and convince more people to say yes. The fundamental thing is this really is operations management, which is rewriting of fundamental processes, people, and tool sets in order to deliver organizational capability. And that is not an ongoing thing. There are people who are deeply specialized in that, but they'll go into a company for a year, sort the processes and systems out, get them up and running, train people, and then move out. And then people just run at those processes. It's back to what I was saying about, like, the monkeys. They eventually they go wrong because the world changes, but for a good amount of time, that's actually how you operate businesses effectively.
Yeah. The other one that springs to mind is, which is slightly different to the monkey one, but also is a learned behavior, is when they tie a rope around the leg of the elephant when it's young, and they put a stake in the ground and can't move.
Yeah.
And as it grows, they take sort of the peg out of the ground, but as long as that rope is around the leg, they think they can't move. So it's a learned behavior. And so
Yeah.
people are no different. We have to retrain ourselves, rechip ourselves, and be open-minded and curious to go, well, what is that rope still stuck to that peg in the ground, right? Because it's not any longer. There's so much more you can do.
Do you know one of the things? I've got a young daughter, and she's too young to understand these at the moment. But I've been thinking about a lot of concepts that I kind of want to make sure that she experiences to really understand and develop a challenging mind.
Just say them on, yeah, she can listen to the episodes.
Yeah, it might take a little bit of time. She's pretty young, but one of these principles is experimentation versus execution. And when you're a child, everything is about experimentation. There's no pressure for execution. And then you go into school, and nowadays you're in a school system that, to be honest, is training the majority of people to just be workers at a desk for the rest of their life. Which is not bad, but it's like, look, the whole point is to beat experimentation out of those people and just turn them into execution. And then once you get into a lot of large corporates, it's not about experimentation anymore. It's about execution. So it's like, write me a business plan and tell me why you're going to succeed at this. And like, actually, one of the fundamental things about entrepreneurship and venture capital is that you have to relearn what children are born with, which is you're fundamentally experimenting. And you have to have a certain mindset of joy, and the only failure in experimentation is not getting a result. It's not about getting a result that you want. It's just the failure is I didn't get a result from my experiment. So like the way I look at this is how do you find the global optimum of the business model of the company that you're in? Well, you have to experiment.
Yeah.
So and you can't be in a business that is operationally executing and experimenting at the same time. They don't work. So you have to be in one or the other. This is actually why innovation departments have such a hard time deploying innovation in companies, because a lot of these big companies are just execution houses.
Yes, and innovation departments are expected to produce positive results all of the time, which is unfair.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas I'd be like, the only objective of the innovation department is to test things that might be of benefit to our business model. And I'd be saying, I just want to know, it's the pace of testing that you're doing and the ambition of testing. That is what I would gauge at. And then, again, I wrote about this in my book, is that in our life in projects, one of the things I wrote about is that you never want to corrupt a project with multiple kinds of existential risk. So, for example, design risk is epistemological, as in you don't even know what you're doing.
Wow,
So
that's a big word for South African. Thanks.
So, like, if you don't know the technology will work, you're not going to set up a big operation to produce 7,000 of them. You'll be like, whoa, let's make sure this works first. And if you're trying to operationalize something, so put the processes around taking a tech and then actually implementing it, so making one unit actually produce one unit, that's separate in itself. And it's the way I see this. Like, if I see an innovation department that's targeted on producing tangible results, I'm kind of like, okay, well, that's actually not really experimentation. That's just procurement from small organizations that haven't hit mega scale yet. That's all that is, really. It's not going in and assessing fundamental challenges. And by the way, that's totally fine, because that's still of massive value to organizations. But let's be very clear, it's not fundamental innovation.
Where does an innovation team or department sit in an organization? Does it fall under IT, operations, finance, on its own?
It depends on the organization, doesn't it?
It does, 100%. You're not going to go down the rabbit hole with me. That's fine. I'm joking. But to that point, I'm going to be as bold and go, you know what? With the way technology is, the IT department is and will become the HR department, the project controls department, the commercial department, every single thing that's done on a computer as a department or function will become the IT department.
Yeah, this is something I see when I see like Gartner analyzing markets, and I actually disagree with a lot of the analysis that their analysts put out. It's almost like it's been through 70,000 committees before they've put it out. But anyway, what I fundamentally see is the software spending budgets of companies absolutely exploding. Or more specifically, the tool budgets of companies.
Mm-hmm.
So, think about construction companies. Before engines were invented, their tool budgets were probably pretty low. It was probably a bunch of like shovels and a bunch of picks. And then diggers got invented, and suddenly balloons, and now about a third of all the cost of a project is equipment going into it. These tunnel boring machines that HS2 are using are hundreds of millions of pounds.
Amazing bit of kit, though.
Incredible equipment. Can do the job of like 1 million people.
Yeah.
And I'd much prefer some very well-educated, very highly paid tunnel machine operators using a machine that does the work of 1 million people, so we don't have to send 1 million people down a mine to dig a tunnel. Instead, 1 million people can be, being doctors and nurses and policemen and like these kinds of things. But like if you look at construction, less than 1% of budgets are spent on software right now. And it's like, no, that's going to be like 5 or 6% in a couple of years because of the automation.
Yeah, and you know what I mean by when I say, all these departments will become the IT department. Let me clarify for those that don't, in my mind, and disagree with me if you want. It doesn't mean that the IT manager is going to take over the project controls manager's job.
Nope.
You still need someone that understands project controls, that understands commercial and contracts, and understands finance, but will also have to deeply understand software, technology, automation.
Do you know, Dale? I'll give you the perfect example. It's already happened. Like we'll say statements like this, and actually all these statements are true because they're already true today. It's just that it's hard to relate them to the context. So, for example, supply chain is owned by IT. There is no big company where supply chain and procurement isn't owned by IT because it's all massive Oracle, Microsoft, and SAP ERP systems.
Mm-hmm.
And the ERP system, the implementation for a business of, $1 billion, $500 million turnover a year will be like 20 million. And there'll be no jobs in procurement that don't use that ERP system. So there's no length of career, no skill set, no personality that you can bring to a company to get a job in that function that doesn't use that ERP.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, cool, there, it's already happened.
HR, payroll, everything,
Yep, it's just getting more and more. It'd just be like, okay, well, I have HR systems and ERP systems in our company and all of this. Cool. Then, a lot of the job of the legal department about drafting contracts, well, I don't need them to do that anymore. I can just have an AI do it and then someone read it. It's just like, it just eats away at the repetitive, boring jobs.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it's like if I spend, I don't know, like if I'm spending 2 people's worth of money on lawyers for contracts, and I can pay a software provider 10% and lose one of those people, yeah, fine. I've still got a lawyer, by the way, but the lawyer's doing the work of 2 because I paid 10% to some software company.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not in the space, so I don't know if this existed, might well do, but, you think of the work that a bookkeeper does, right?
Yeah.
Why can't you just upload all of these digital documents, receipts, contracts, whatever it is, plug it into your accounting system and just automatically debits and credits, the right accounts. And then voila, you have your P&L, your balance sheet, all sorts of things. Because effectively, that's what they're doing. They're looking at it, they're going, this belongs here. So let me enter this over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, those types of things.
These are all coming up. Like what was really interesting is a couple of weeks ago, the Jensen guy who runs NVIDIA, he said that he was on stage and he presented and said the future of industry will be verticalized AI applications. And that's actually what I've been hearing from Venture for 3 years. They were like, yeah, and a verticalized application is a profession. So, for example, an AI specific for venture capital due diligence, or in our case, an AI specifically for project controls operation during project execution, or an AI specifically for genomic sequencing in cancer diagnosis. You will have thousands of these different AI workers, and that's what's going to create massive productivity across an industry.
Yeah, and then the ability to connect all of them, right?
Yeah.
How powerful is that? Just for humanity at large, we like to fantasize and we romanticize about sort of the downsides of adopting new technology, and how it could destroy human beings and our existence. But there's some really cool and great stuff we can do as well in a controlled manner. And this maybe brings us back to the original topic we're talking about around sort of governments controlling things and putting
Mm-hmm.
safeguards in place, etc. And it's a balance, right? And we'll on this podcast we'll debate all the different areas and angles of the technology. But I think ultimately, when listeners listen back and they hear what we're saying, there's balance. We want to progress. We want to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be cautious. But just remember that it's not going away. That is the key message.
Yeah, there's a people have tricks of logic in their mind, which I see. One of them is the inevitability bias, where because something can't be done today, they assume that it will never be able to be done in the future.
Yep.
And the key question here is, you know, uh, it's who wins. The where the incentives, and if something is fundamental, as in it allows people to do more with less, or it is enjoyable to human beings. Generally, those, you've been trying to make drugs like heroin go away for many years. Ain't happening. Why? Because some people like it.
Yep.
And it's like, if it's that, then it's inevitable, fundamentally. The only way, in my mind, for example, to make heroin go away is to make humans immune to it. That you'd
Yeah.
make it go away overnight because it wouldn't have the effect, and people would be like, right, well, I'm not buying this anymore. That's really the only way to do it. And where we've got to now is that AI is absolutely inevitable. So, there's many viewpoints one can have on that perspective, but the only correct viewpoints is, okay, well, either I'm totally ambivalent, I don't care, up to I'm going to figure out how it's going to impact.
Yeah, absolutely. The other one I'll just throw in there, I know we were heading towards the end of this episode, is, and I think Al brought it up previously, or it might have been you or both, where we discussed this. If we're moving to an economy where technology drives a lot of what we do, and currently the biggest drug, talking about drugs, is dopamine hits, social media, etc., which is very, very harmful and impactful
Yeah.
to our mental health, etc. If AI can take that away, and AI is trying to gain the attention of other AI, and humans spend less time on social media and screens and interacting more, that is an amazing byproduct as well, if you think about it.
I think, yeah, a little bit. I think that's a nice brain fart. What I'd say is, you got to remember, like, what actually powers an economy, and there's lots of squiggly lines in the middle, but fundamentally, a single individual delivers something into the economy, and a single human receives something from the economy. The economy is just a really complicated way of getting stuff from person A to person B, and there is no such thing as an economy that doesn't end at a person or starts with a person. And you may think, well, what if robots are automatically doing this and that? Someone owns the robots.
Yeah.
Somebody has invested to get that auto. And by the way, this happens now. There'll be dudes and ladies who own mines where there's big machines mining ore, sticking it on ships and sending it abroad, and money enters their account. Like, we kind of already live in this world. It's just we're talking about a different bit of the world being automated. Like, so that's one. What I'd say the second is, if the economy begins with a person and ends with a person, then the only way I see social media being taken away from people is if people give up control of their spending habits.
Yeah. So maybe I'll say to that, I'll add, counter, or just comment, is you're still going to have end-to-end people and people, but you'll remove the time people spend on screens.
Potentially, you can also develop an AI that hounds people to make them as addicted as possible to certain things. What I'm saying is, like, there's very many ways that this can go down. The thing that's most interesting to me is how will the generational shift cope? Because historically,
they're not coping now, though. That's the problem, right? Young folks that are in their 20s struggle. They struggled because, one, they lived through, when they were in school and university, lockdowns, which impacted them in more ways than we actually appreciate. And now they're continuing to struggle because everything's online. Yeah?
Yeah.
So it's a real problem. And that's why I say if AI can take us away from those screens and interact with each other and just give us what we need.
Potentially. I think you're looking at some big political things there instead, because at the moment, most global economies are geared on getting the average person to work as many hours as possible, and then taking that effort for the government machine. So, like in the UK, the average tax rate of the average person in the UK is about 46%. So people work 6 months of the year for the British government to do stuff, and then they are allowed to work the last 6 months for their home and their food and this kind of thing. It would require a fundamental reconsideration of the value of people's individual time to do other things, because there's two ways this can go. One is you've got all of this technology that makes people more productive. Let's give them time back, which, by the way, was the promise of like farming machinery.
Let's face it.
And then the other one, the other one is, cool, we can get people to do way more now. Let's keep working them hard and just make more.
Well, I hope the latter continues, but replacing the word people with technology. We can get technology to do more, because that's what we can do right now, right? We can do that right now. We know that. You and I know that, right?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to get some pretty egalitarian governments coming in to make that happen. But, maybe the Netherlands will do it.
Well, yeah, let's see. Let's hope. We the ones that want to push boundaries and
true. I'm not saying it's a no-go. I'm just saying it's less a technology choice and it's more a political choice.
Absolutely. But let's see where it goes. Anyway, we can futurescape all we want. Let's see how this unfolds and plays. Greg, it's been amazing to catch up with you. We haven't caught up in a while. Just before we end, I want to give a bit of a teaser to what's coming up within the Gen AI podcast world. So we've teamed up with Opiner. Opiner is basically a closed community that will be launching soon. So watch the space where you can get involved as a listener. You can send in your questions. We can answer you directly. We can even look at potentially putting your questions on future episodes as well. We haven't launched just yet, so it is a bit of a teaser for you. But watch the space, folks. We're looking to get far more engaged with you and what is happening in your world and some of the questions you want answered by our esteemed big brains, Greg and Al. I'll leave me out of that equation. So, folks, it's been amazing to have you with us on this episode. Greg, any final thoughts before we end the episode?
No, I find these debates fun. What I'd say with everyone is take everything we say with a pinch of salt, because whilst we are thinking through these things quite deeply, we've been wrong more times than we've been right. So it's more about just thinking through the process.
Absolutely. Back to the innovation theme of earlier, as you said, Greg, it's all about finding that one thing that does work. and finding out what doesn't narrows it down. So we'll leave it with you there, folks. Greg, be awesome to catch up with you in person when you're next in town.
Yeah.
But other than that, you take care of yourself, folks. Look after yourselves as well. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If not, let us know. Catch you on the next one. Bye for now.